this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we look at some top news items from the past week and speak with Cerba on using SDN to control workload placement with greater mobility. Well, thanks for joining us in this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief for RCR Wireless News. Well, for this week's featured interview, we speak with Cerba, where we discuss the use of SDN to control workload placement with greater mobility, hidden benefits of SDN, and how to get that all-important return on investment from SDN deployments. But first, let's take a look at some of the top headlines from across the space over the past week. While speaking at an investor conference this week, AT&T's Ralph de la Vega provided some financial insight into how the company is looking to transform revenue generation through its SDN, NFV, and cloud efforts. De la Vega noted the company's plans have allowed it to reduce the capital expense and operating expense needed to run its operations. In addition, the move is also pushing revenue generation by allowing AT&T to turn up new services almost instantaneously. Citing AT&T's Network on Demand platform as an example, De la Vega noted that the company was able to roll the platform across the country in weeks. And as an example of the service, De la Vega said companies taking advantage of the platform were able to alter their service speeds in less than 90 seconds. De la Vega also hinted that AT&T later this year plans on rolling out an SDN effort across 63 countries simultaneously. As for the impact the move towards virtualized network platforms is having on AT&T's bottom line, De la Vega said the carrier has done quite a bit to close the margin gap compared with legacy systems. Also this week, the European Telecommunications Standards Institute said its open source MANO initiative rolled out its Release Zero code package, which it claims integrates seed code supplied by Telefonica, Rift.io, Canonical, and other vendors. ETSI said the release happened 1 month ahead of schedule. The organization said the initiative is closely aligned with the evolution of ETSI NFV and it plans to provide a regularly updated reference implementation of NFV MANO. Moving forward, ETSI said it expects Release 1 to be unveiled within 6 months and is to include plans to extend current multi-virtualized infrastructure manager and multi-site support and include additions to service modeling and enhanced platform-aware resource allocation. The MANO release is currently available via ETSI for download. Well, for this week's featured interview, we speak with Andrew Hillier, who's the CTO and co-founder of Cerba. Before diving into the company's view on using SDN to control workload placement with greater mobility, hidden benefits of SDN, and how to get that all-important return on investment from SDN deployments, Hillier provided a brief overview of the company as well as its view on the current development and deployment pace of SDN. Let's take a look at the interview now. Well, hey, thanks for joining us this week. This week we are joined by Andrew Hillier, who's the CTO and co-founder of Cerba, to talk a bit about the evolving SDN space. So, Andrew, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Nice to be here, Dan.
Great. Let me start off with maybe a little overview of the company for those who might not know much about you guys.
Sure. Cerba is an analytics company, and we basically focus on workload placement and resource allocation. So we figure out where to put stuff. And we do that at a couple of levels. So you can imagine, in a data center or in a carrier space, you have to basically put workloads together on physical servers. And we do an analysis. It's a lot like a game of Tetris. You notice a Tetris lamp behind me here.
Very nice, yeah.
It's a very good analogy of what we do, because we'll look at the shapes and sizes of the workloads and say, if we combine them in a certain way, we can increase the efficiency and decrease the operational risk. So if we know certain workloads are busy at certain times of days, and again, a lot of enterprises, a lot of carriers have known patterns of activity, we can take advantage of that with predictive analytics. So we can basically run more workloads on less and make sure they don't run into each other at the same time. And that's at one level, that's what we do. And then at a higher level, we're almost like a hotels.com. So we'll say you've got a new app or a service that you need to deploy, and we look across all the infrastructure, including across platforms, and say, or maybe in the cloud, and say, yeah, depending on what you need, that should run in that data center in that environment because it's a disk-intensive workload, for example, or it has a lot of I/O requirements at a certain time of day. So we can do very precise routing and reservation in the capacity world. So we drive efficiency at the lower level, and then we drive automation in the routing and reservation at the higher level. I think SDN is an interesting topic for us because some of our customers are pretty advanced in the SDN space, and the analogy we would use, it's like a bigger game of Tetris. All of a sudden now these VMs are more mobile, so they can run across, they're not now bounded by the network boundaries anymore, so we can do a bigger optimization and get even bigger benefits. So that's a pretty exciting area because when you see people starting to get to that utopia of having one giant pool of capacity, SDN takes you a lot closer to that.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So obviously, all those years that we spent playing Tetris in the past are all starting to actually make sense at this point. Now we can actually use those skills at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good analogy because if you look at most data centers, it's like a badly played game of Tetris. If the blocks are coming too fast and you can't figure it out, it gets all jumbled up. And that's really what everybody looks like if you don't use analytics to figure this out.
Yeah, that's a good insight. And obviously, it does seem like that the data center world, the enterprise world, even the telecom carrier world, it does seem like over the past couple of years that the load of data traffic and things coming onto the networks has increased at such a rate that it seems like this ability to optimize what's happening out there has become pretty key. But also, it seems like the ramp up of that need has been pretty dramatic. I'm guessing for you guys, you've seen quite a bit of uptake, or at least a lot more work, it seems like, in this space. Because again, it just seems like this talk of, again, everything going to the cloud now and everything in software and just the pace of everything seems to be quickening so much. We're getting to those later stages in a Tetris game, really, where things are coming down so fast that you really got to be very, very active in trying to make sure you put these pieces in the right spot, or again, you get a bottleneck and it's game over for some people.
That's exactly it. We like to think of it as a pipeline of demand coming in, and that pipeline is becoming more complicated. So it used to be that, you still have, enterprise requests. I need to deploy some SAP modules somewhere, and they come in at a certain speed. They might have weeks to plan that. And then somebody, now you can have a self-service request where somebody needs a VM right now. And so you get these multiple speeds. You get things coming through the pipe at different speeds. And again, it's like a Tetris game where things are falling. Some are going really slow, but they're really critical, and some are going really fast. And so the whole pipeline has kind of opened up and become more complicated. And that's why a lot of people, I think, would be using spreadsheets in the past to try and figure this out, and they can't do it anymore. There's not enough rows in the spreadsheet, and you just can't keep up with what's happening. So it's a real big problem. And you're absolutely right. We're seeing a lot of customers move to hybrid cloud or just on-prem cloud. Some of our customer service providers that need to be agile for their customers, and it's just becoming a real big supply chain challenge. Basically.
Yeah. Now maybe let's talk a bit about, I guess, the analytics aspect. You brought up, you guys use a lot of analytics on this. I guess, how do you guys use that, and what does that provide for you, and then what do you in turn provide to your customers when you get the information out of their networks then?
So we basically are a product that runs typically on-prem. We have a SaaS offering as well that we're bringing out, but mostly on-prem, and it will gather data on the compute and the storage and the network simultaneously, because they're all one big system. You can't ignore any of those and get the right answer. So if I want to bring a new app in, I have to make sure not only that it has enough CPU and memory at the time the data needs it, but I need to make sure there's enough I/O on the NICs and the HBAs. I need to make sure there's enough storage. I need to make sure there's enough of the right tier of storage that's connected to the right servers. So it's a really, really complex game. So the analytics will basically look at all these factors at once. We have a multidimensional analysis where we basically get all this data, and it's like a giant analysis cube. And we run it, we do permutations and say, well, here's a solution that will optimize your efficiency and minimize your risk. And the interesting thing about it is that it's to truly get efficiency, you really have to look at all these variables at once. Some people are like, well, I can just look, if CPU gets busy, I might move something. If that host is too busy, you move it over there or move it back. And that's useful for getting out of a problem, but it doesn't let you optimize anything because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow morning at 9:30. So really the way is to look at all the patterns, all the history, all the probabilities, and figure it out centrally. And that's what we do. And then that in turn drives a lot of efficiency. Usually we see about a 48% increase in density over that bad game of Tetris.
Yeah. So again, it's not just tackling the problem in the immediate sense, but it's, again, obviously you want to get it fixed immediately, but you want to plan it out so where, like you said, it's not coming back again tomorrow, the same problem all over again. You want to make sure whatever you put into place can resolve it longer term, hopefully.
Absolutely. We know a lot of patterns at 9 in the morning or 9:30 in the morning. Certain things happen every day. We know at 8 p.m. at night, certain things happen. Some things are random, and that's fine. You can say, well, that's random. We don't know what it's going to do. But we take all that into the account in the model, because if you have that information, you can use it to your advantage. So not only does it drive up density, but we can say, well, I'm not going to put these two workloads together that I know get busy at the same time of day. I've seen them do that 9 days out of 10. So why would I put them together when I can avoid that? So it really reduces contention as well. We see a big drop in things running into each other, basically, when you use the analytics.
Makes sense. Now, I guess, what are you seeing in the market today for you guys? Because it does seem like we were saying earlier, the market does seem to be ramping up so rapidly in this. Are you seeing, I guess, what are your biggest challenges that you're seeing out there from your customers in terms of, their ability to kind of manage all this happening at one time? Is there a specific one or two, examples that you've seen out there that perhaps kind of indicate or kind of indicative of what's kind of going on out there in the market today?
Sure. Well, I think everybody's moving to hybrid cloud. I think we saw a big shift in the last 6 to 9 months where it went from something people are talking about to now it's a high priority. And that also, a lot of times, the on-prem clouds, a lot of our customers would work SDN into that. So basically, some people call their software-defined environment, their cloud environment interchangeably. They're kind of the new mix. But what I think they're hitting up against is that they need, and there's many words, and one good word I hear one customer uses governance. They need a way to actually understand how they can leverage these technologies without kind of making a mess. If you get a newfound freedom and you make a mess, like this SDN in your data center is great. It means you can set up networks quickly, you can move things around really quickly, but if you don't know what to do with that, then it's not going to really get you anywhere. So if you're smart about it, you can get a lot of efficiency out of it, but if you don't know, and that really goes right into the whole hybrid cloud story. Now, if I want to go and start leveraging Amazon or something else, there has to be some ground rules about how I do that. And people say, well, can that workload run in Amazon? And people say, oh, I don't know, I think so. And I always say, it's not an opinion. It's just science that will tell you this. If you know what the workload needs and you know what the carrier provides, you can scientifically determine that. So I think there's a big shift to move towards a science rather than opinion and guesstimates. And everybody's challenged with that. It's like, hybrid cloud, software defined, all these things are just making that more in focus, that they need that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you're right. I mean, I've talked to a lot of companies who are looking to deploy or have deployed, as some sort of virtualized environment in their back office system there. And that's one of the issues that always seems to come up is, I want to deploy this, but if it's just going to be the same thing I already have now, but more complicated because I don't know how to use it, what's the point of me doing it? I mean, again, I need to find some sort of efficiency to make this worth my while, because obviously the initial deployments are always going to be a bit of a challenge because it's something new, but you don't want to make it just twice the amount of work, because that just stresses everybody else out and causes issues in the network. So it seems like to be able to really fine tune what you're deploying and know what you're deploying and be able to get a handle on it is key to these initial deployments for a lot of these companies out there.
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, a lot of times these technologies just make things go wrong faster.
Yeah.
Go wrong. People saw that in the early days of virtualization, and I think people are about to see it in cloud too, where they shove stuff to the cloud and they think, oh, great, now it's out of control. So I think, and there's some hidden benefits on that. Like again, SDN is a good example where I think it's fantastic how you can spin up a network and configure it without doing any wiring and kind of wire things together virtually, and it's extremely powerful, and that saves people a lot of time. Now, if you go to make a business case around that you're going to save somebody some time, that's not the strongest business case to pay for technology that can be quite expensive, frankly. So I think it really behooves everybody to look at the full benefit, because again, in SDN, one of the biggest benefits we see is that you can increase workload density. And that's a really hard dollar business case. I can say I can run 30, 40% more, 50% more in this environment. The unit cost goes down. And when you're building a cloud, of course, you want your unit cost to be as low as possible. So some people look at the benefits and think that's a great technology for X, but they're not exploring all the value that you can get. And again, like you said, sometimes if I just use it for X, maybe it just becomes, it creates other challenges I didn't anticipate. So I think really thinking it through and understanding the true impact, is important.
Yeah, that's a great topic. And I've talked to, again, like I said, I've talked to some companies about this, and that seems to be another challenge for them is, being able to kind of get the business model in line for this, because again, it all sounds great, and it all, hey, virtualizing things and spinning things up and down rapidly sound great on, when you're talking about them, but when you want to get the CFO to kind of sign up on stuff, he has to see that it actually makes sense financially, or they're not going to do it. So to be able to kind of lay out, hey, this is what we can do, and this is where it'll benefit us. And this is our ROI on the deployment too. I mean, you got to have those kind of laid out and at least some sort of good estimate of what's going to happen with that before you get the final sign off from the executive up above, I'm sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why, again, we are predictive analytics, and there's many aspects of that helps you on kind of the short-term level, just like I said, like a game of Tetris, understanding what's going to happen today, but a longer term as well. So if you're making a technology that's very dynamic, and then the executives might say, well, I'm just going to cost me next month. Well, we don't know. People can turn stuff on like crazy. It could cost us a lot more because we're not looking forward very far. So it's important to actually be able to forecast, which is back to that pipeline. The way we see it is that there's a pipeline of demand and there's a portfolio of supply, and you need to scientifically link them together. And a lot of people are now thinking along the lines of the demands are the independent variable. They're the stuff that I have to meet. I can't change that. I can change the supply. That's what I flex, this portfolio. And when I connect them scientifically, I can start to forecast very accurately. I can say, this is what we're going to need in Q3 because I have my demand models and I know how I'm going to meet it. So rather than just being a wild west of workloads, which some people kind of view the cloud as just whatever, turn it all on. It's not, you can't work with that from a business model perspective. These executives, they don't like variable costs can be hard to deal with, or unexpected costs, of course. So I think it needs to be grounded in it's more efficiency, more agility, but at the same time being a known quantity. And that's I think where analytics comes in a big way.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, I guess as you look at maybe the technology aspect of this, you mentioned, I guess, the hybrid cloud model, which is becoming, like you said, very popular right now. Whether you're using something on-prem and then also some sort of, a hosted service somewhere. Does it seem like, from what you guys are seeing at least, that those models are sufficient or scalable enough to handle what enterprises are looking for? Because, always when you go to something that's, perhaps, a public cloud type of platform, and you try to bring it to the private cloud, there's always concerns about the stability of that, the security of that. Whenever you let something off premise, there's always some challenges there. I guess what you're seeing maybe in general on that, I mean, are you seeing that those are stable enough platforms to kind of really help companies that they can actually tap into those and not be too concerned at this point?
Well, I think they're definitely stable. I think it all comes down, I mean, there's multiple things. I think you can buy whatever you want in a cloud model now. So you can buy a really expensive, really stable model, or you can buy the cheapest model that may not have the resiliency in the hardware. And then it gets down to the application design. So if I have an app that was designed a few years, 10 years ago, it might require resiliency to keep running. Whereas newer apps might be designed to fail differently, and they can keep running on. So I think whether something can run in a certain cloud model depends on how the app was written in many ways. If you take legacy apps in most organizations, they're difficult to put in the really low cost cloud model. But you can go buy an expensive, you can go rent physical bare metal and of any spec that you want from most providers. So we've got to the point now where you can buy almost anything, and you can host almost anything. The trick is to match them up, because you can't take certain apps and put them in certain models because they won't work very well, or they'll be very expensive. And the other thing we see is that there's an assumption that cloud is cheaper, but it's not always cheaper. It really depends on the workload. So we've done studies. In fact, we're announcing some results of a study later this week where it depends on the workload. So if I have a workload that, if I look at a model where I buy instances in the cloud by the hour, they might work very well if I have a workload that runs for 4 hours and turns off, or 2 days and turns off. But if I have a transactional app that runs 24/7, but doesn't do very much most of the time, it can be more expensive running in the cloud than it can just in an internal virtual environment, because I'm paying for the capacity whether I'm using it or not. So it's really complex. If you look at whether an app is fit for purpose or whether the cloud is fit for purpose for an app, and how much it's going to cost. Again, that's something else that we analyze, and it's extremely important, because people just assume these things are cheaper, but they're not always cheaper. If you own your own data center and you're still going to use it for the next little while, it may not be cheaper at all to use certain models.
Yeah, I mean, are you finding that at least from your customer base, that do most of them, when they come to you initially, are their models, are there, I guess plans, are they in place? I mean, do they have a good understanding of all this? Or, I mean, are you seeing a lot of customers coming to you and you look at what their plans are? Are you just like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? Are companies understanding this more and more, or is it still a bit of a challenge out there for companies who are trying to get into this space, enterprises trying to get into the space who are not quite sure of what they're really doing?
Yeah, well, I think it's a mix. Like, I think if you divide it up into brownfield and greenfield is a good way to think of it. We have, if you look at existing virtual environments, even initial Gen 1 cloud environments, people have that very well figured out. And they usually turn to us for that, to drive up the density, drive down the software costs. There's all kinds of benefits on that. And, that's our customers use us for that. That's one of the reasons. If you look at what we would call greenfield or hybrid cloud or software defined or newer stuff, a lot of that stuff is still working itself out. So I would say a lot of customers, especially on the hybrid cloud front, are still sorting out their plans. They're in varying degrees of advancement, but I don't think anybody would say they've got it fully figured out yet. And I think we're right in the midst of them hitting these kind of challenges where they're saying, well, we don't have a platform to make this decision of whether it goes to A or B, or how much it's going to cost when it goes there, because this workload has a certain pattern. So I wouldn't say anybody's doing it wrong, because they're all sorting it out. And of course, our samples are self-selecting, because a lot of people we talk to are using our product as the foundation for a lot of that. So, but it's a very interesting time, because I think everybody's going through this journey. And I do think there will be some mistakes. I think there will be people that rush to something because conceptually it makes a lot of sense, and then in practice they get the bill and they realize it didn't work, or there's some kind of failure and they realize it's not going to work out. So I think the pendulum will swing a bit more before it, back and forth a bit more before it really settles down.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're right. I mean, again, we kind of focus more on the telecom side of things. It does seem like what you're saying is happening a lot on the telecom side of things, because again, we have these operators who are rushing into it, and some of them are having to really drive at least what they're looking to try to do in the market. But then a lot of them are just sitting on the sidelines saying, hey, this is a little too complicated for us at this point. We're not quite sure what we want to do here. We know we want to do something eventually, but it's probably not quite ready for what we're looking to do. And that still seems like kind of where we are maybe. I mean, I know telecom is maybe a little outside of your guys' normal frame of reference there, but does it seem like that the models that are in place, or that where this is all heading to, does it seem like that at least how it could support the telecom space? Is it moving in the right direction at a good enough pace, do you think, or is it still some challenges there that perhaps telecom might run into in terms of really taking full advantage, operationally and efficiency wise of this move towards virtualized platforms with SDN and cloud and things like that?
Well, I think so, and we do have telcos that are customers of ours, and we have partners as well. And I think, there's a slightly different emphasis. So what we find is NFV is pretty big in the telco space as well. So the ability to stand up, virtualized network services, and then almost we see, someone looking at microservice type architecture where I can stand up a basket of services for a subscriber. That's pretty advanced, but I think at the same time, that kind of business is very risk averse. Yeah. So we work with a spectrum of customers, and for example, financial services, they're very risk averse in certain areas of the company. I find anybody that's doing that's a carrier is also by nature very risk averse. So that I think it dictates the pace. But we see NFV again be a very very exciting technology in those spaces, and along with that SDN. So it all depends. I think if you look at a telco that's also a cloud provider, providing a more full infrastructure as a service, everything I've talked about is in scope. It's the very same problem. If you're hosting for a bunch of for a multi-tenant, customer environment, or if you're hosting for your own environment, you have all the same, even if you're not looking at multiple providers, which environment and which data center or workload lands in is a very difficult challenge. So we see the very same technology required for carriers as for enterprises if they're cloud providers. If you look at the more low-level services, then I think there's a little bit of different emphasis. But we've seen, for example, Desire to Analyze saying, I've got to stand up a virtual firewall. I need to go on a server that has hardware encryption enabled. And so you need to be able to analyze that and say, well, when you're landing this service, it needs to go on certain hardware that can provide certain facilities. So it's the same kind of general analysis, a slightly different emphasis in that case.
Yeah, makes sense. I think you're right. It's interesting because as I started kind of covering the space, initially it did seem like SDN perhaps was probably a hotter topic for a lot of telecom guys, at least. NFV was kind of tagging along a little bit. And then it seemed like pretty rapidly the NFV space really became a hot part for all of this. With some more trepidation or some more challenges on the SDN side of things, which you kind of need to support all of this. And so it does seem like you're right now. It does seem like most of the telecom guys are really pushing the NFV side of things, where the SDN and maybe even to a lesser extent the cloud environment is perhaps not quite as exciting. But it seems like those are platforms that are perhaps a little more foundational and things that you really need to have. But you really need to have those things right, perhaps earlier on. Again, with NFV, you can kind of turn things up and down pretty rapidly. But the other side, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it seems like the other side, you need to have a pretty good deployment model in place before you start rolling that out, because otherwise you run into these hiccups. And like you said, telecom operators are risk averse, like you said, or a little conservative perhaps when it comes to rolling out new things. So yeah, they want to make sure it's all working pretty tightly before they get into that model.
Yeah, absolutely. We see. Again, the NFV on the not so much on the enterprise side. Again, I think that and you look at the SDN value. I think really you want to dig a bit deeper to that, because a lot of the value of that comes from two-tier networking as well. So spine leaf networking. So for example, we've done an integration with Arista, and we're seeing more and more of that out there, where you can make the network a fabric, which gets you a lot of the benefit we're talking about. So whether you adopt an SDN solution, quote unquote, like in software, the two-tier networking is really a big part of that value. That's where you really get that workload mobility out of it. Of course, that requires a bit of tech refresh. So it's not to adopt that, you have to actually rewire your networks. So when people are ready to, I think we're going to see that roll over more and more as people replace gear to go to these more, these more advanced network models. And then you're in a place to support that. But not everybody can go and just rebuy an entire, replumb their entire network as a result. So I think that also dictates the pace as well, that the NFV is easier to kind of stamp out rapidly without requiring different hardware underneath. SDN, you get the real benefit. I think you need to actually look at the plumbing underneath it as well.
Makes sense. Well, I guess maybe when enterprises start to roll out these platforms, what sort of benefits should they expect from these deployments? I know you talked earlier about you're seeing some like a 48% improvement in efficiency in some networks. Are those kind of numbers that enterprises should expect as they kind of move toward these environments, or what do you think that they should kind of be focused on in terms of their expectation levels, I guess, in terms of these moves towards virtualization?
Well, I think the 48% is a baseline. We haven't specifically done studies of SDN environments. It's higher than that, but we haven't quantified exactly how much. But again, that bigger pool lets you allocate resources far more. You just get high economies of scale. So I think I think if you're doing it and you're not getting a density increase, you're not doing it right, I guess is one way to look at it. Now, the other thing that we do, which is a pretty advanced analysis, which is kind of it's kind of a different area, but it's a huge benefit here, is that it's software license optimization. So one of the things that we do is we place VMs so that you can minimize the physical server footprint of certain software. So if you have SQL servers running, you can say, well, let's nudge them all together so we only run them on a subset of the physical servers. And we see customers, oftentimes design separate environments to host certain applications, but that's not efficient. Then you have these islands of capacity. So with SDN, you can keep a big pool of capacity, but you can contain pieces intelligently so that you're minimizing your cost. So you should actually see your software costs go down if you're doing it right. If they may go up though, if you're not careful. So for example, if I have SDN and now a VM can go anywhere in my whole data center because it's all low latency, I might have to license the whole data center for SQL Server. Right? That's kind of what you would have to do if you didn't think that through, right? So it's one of those cases where it could make a big problem for you, or it could be a huge opportunity depending on if you're armed and ready for it. And so I think the density of the hardware, the density of the software, volatility goes down. You should be able to have things calm down. Things moving around a lot, they don't make you agile. It just makes you volatile. Being ready for unexpected business loads is agile. So I think by properly planning it, you should see higher agility as well, but not thrashing. So I think these are all kind of the benefits. Of course, SDN is going to make it much easier to set up networks, and you should see a huge administrative, and reduce time to deploy business services. But I think those are one of the many benefits you can get if you do it right.
Yeah, but again, to gain the most efficiency possible, which is kind of the whole point of doing this anyway, you really need to kind of be smarter in deployment. You can't just throw this stuff out there and expect it to make itself work right. You got to go out there and kind of work through the whole system, see where you have needs, where you have excess, and kind of make sure you move the pieces around. And then whatever you have that's extra after that, then you can throw that part away and start getting some efficiency that way then.
Yeah, it's kind of, in math, it'd be like local optimization versus global optimization. You want the thing to be somewhat self-organizing, but just by doing it on a second-to-second basis won't give you the global optimization. It keeps you out of trouble. You want to basically do a top-down and say, this thing, I know it's running as efficiently as possible. I know exactly how much hardware I need. Because like I said, if you're not factoring what's going to happen tomorrow morning in the loads, then you can't really remove servers from the environment and really get any efficiency gain. You have to actually understand what your high watermark is. Yeah,
interesting. Well, I guess maybe one final topic then. I guess as you look ahead a little bit over the next 6 to 12 months, what are some of the bigger challenges you see kind of facing your market? Obviously, you're working with a lot of companies out there. What do you see as perhaps maybe some of the bigger challenges you see kind of coming down the lane in terms of what they need to do, maybe what the industry itself needs to kind of be prepared to kind of tackle the next 6 months to a year or so?
Well, I think there's several things. We talked about the technology quite a bit, and the I think a lot of stuff already in place. There's a lot of good, all the networking pieces and SDN and NFV. There's a lot of good stuff already in place. I think it's a matter of people figuring out how to adopt it. And I think there's a good angle to look at this from the skills perspective as well. I think people need to kind of wrap their head around this and maybe stop thinking in old ways. We see even some customers setting up new groups that are kind of isolated from the older groups to think differently about new storage or network technologies like that. So I think that needs to work itself out, because I think there's a challenge that there's a lot of vesting in technology and in spend, but also in skills and certifications and things like that makes this a little slower ship to turn in some cases, I think. So hopefully we don't see draconian methods where people are just saying, throw it all again, go to a completely new model. Hopefully you can leverage all the good and the old, but I think there will be a bit of a skills transition as people need to start thinking differently and thinking more in a kind of a converged way and not having these silos like everybody has currently. I think that's gonna have to happen over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know a lot of telecom guys I speak with, that is one of their biggest concerns, especially the people who are deep into this evolution, is that they're worried about getting their workforce with their new mindset. Even just getting their executives on board as well. They have these great ideas, but if you don't have the support from the top, obviously, but also you got to have your workers who are versed in this new move. And again, that's for a lot of guys. And again, the telecom space, it's a long history there of people working in a certain way and on certain equipment that they're very comfortable with, and they know how it all works. And so this move towards these new platforms, it's a challenge. It's scary for a lot of people, and to make this, this is a big software move. And all of us, as we get older, we get more and more grumpy with when it comes to technology. So obviously, you have to be able to keep an open mind to this movement. Yeah, like you said, that's going to be a huge challenge, is making sure everybody's on the same page and kind of moving forward, because otherwise, again, we're not getting any of these efficiencies that we're looking to really gain with these deployments.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that too is not having everything in people's heads, but getting it. We use the word codification. So our product's all policy based. And what it lets you do is say, I want to build a policy of how this happens. So I don't ask someone every time. It's just going to happen the way. And so the more you can get out of people and get on paper or in the software or in the control system, so it's automated, the better everyone off is, because you don't want to get called in the middle of the night because of some obscure knowledge. The more you can capture that. So I think part of that whole transition is also what we would call codification. Saying, let's get it written down, or let's kind of capture it all and automate it. And then that's the way forward, because you're never going to survive if you don't do that in the next generation of infrastructure. So I think part of the whole skills transition and kind of shifting over is also, let's capture what we know. And so we don't ever do this again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, Andrew, we definitely appreciate the great insight on this. Obviously, a lot of those topics you touched on are extremely relevant to the telecom space. I mean, again, like I was saying earlier, and most people know, I mean, this is a big move in the telecom space, and there's so many challenges still out there. I mean, we're still on the telecom side so early in the process, and obviously even the data center enterprise world, perhaps a little bit farther along in the process. So the ability to kind of learn from what's happening already out there is going to be key for at least the telecom side to kind of move along this whole evolution really for the network. So definitely appreciate the great insight on this. And obviously we'll touch base with you hopefully down the road as well on the topic. But again, thanks so much for the time and the insight today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the chat. I enjoyed the discussion.
Great. Thanks again.
Take care.
Well, that'll do it for this week's show. Make sure to check us out again next week when we are scheduled to speak with Rift.io on the importance of open source NFV for management and network orchestration. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN, and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.